Members, please take your seats. Members, hey, Colin. Members, please take your seats so we can figure out who's here and not here. Colin. We're taking the picture in 2 minutes. Shelley. Committee will come to order. All members take your seat, and folks in the audience. Are there still people out in the hall that need to get in here? There's still people in the hall? Legg? Mike Legg. Are there people in the hall? Bring them in.
Let Duncan start speaking.
What's that? I'm going to start. Someone say something first. The committee will come to order. All members take their seat. I want to start today by, can the committee come to order? I want to start today off with saying thank you to a very able and loyal staffer, Steve Martinko, who left the committee in August. He's gone on to bigger and better things. He's the executive director of the Port of Pittsburgh. Is Steve? Oh, there he is, back there. Steve Martinko. Steve was Steve endured me for 7 years, almost 8 years. 8 years. He again did a very able job as a deputy staff director, and really was the tip of the spear, working with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle on the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. We're going to miss him greatly. It creates a big hole for us on our side, but we certainly wish him well. So if anybody's going to Pittsburgh and wants to see the port, Martinko's your guy. So Steve, thanks for all your years of service to me. And we wish you well in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I join you in those comments, and from this side of the aisle, I want to say thank you to Steve for his years of service, not only on this committee, but to the people of our country. I got to see him work in action during the water bill, and he was a very big part of us reaching bipartisan agreement and moving that bill forward for jobs and for our country. Thank you, Steve, for your work.
Well, with that, I call the committee to order again. And before we get started on to the business of today, I'd like to recognize the vice chair of the full committee, Jimmy Duncan, who has just, and several other members, finished their work on the P3 panel that they've been working on for the past several months. And Jimmy's would like to acknowledge your efforts and the panel. Thank you for your work. And with that, yield to Mr. Duncan.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Other countries are moving, other developed nations are moving much faster into public-private partnerships than the U.S., but many people suspect that the United States is going to have much more reliance on public-private partnerships in the future. And so you asked us to, on this panel, to come up with recommendations, and we held 2 hearings and 7 roundtables and many, many meetings. And our report was joined by every member. It was a very bipartisan effort. I want to thank my ranking member, Mr. Capuano, and we had 11 members, Congresswoman Miller, Congressman Barletta, Rice, Perry, Meadows, DeFazio, Congresswoman Holmes-Norton, Congressman Larson, and Mahoney, and all 11 were very, very active in our deliberations and our discussions, and I thank all of them for their hard work, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and your vision in bringing this panel to fruition. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you for your work, Chairman Duncan, and with that, his able partner on the committee, the ranking member, Mr. Capuano, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to echo everything that Mr. Duncan just said. For those of you on the panel, I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the bipartisanship. I think this panel is proof that we can do transportation policy on a bipartisan way. You've started that with your chairmanship, and this continues it. And I'm proud to have been a member, and I would like to make the most important finding and recommendation that we had is that we've decided that Mark Meadows will now become a Democrat. And we want to appreciate him for that open endorsement. Mr. Chairman, I'm actually making fun just because it just goes to show we've worked well together. This was an enjoyable experience, and I think we came up with a very good bipartisan report that I think everyone should take a look at so we can work together moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now we'll move on with today. The committee will consider H.R. 5449, the Passenger Rail Reform and Investment Act of 2014, H.R. 5266, to reauthorize the National Estuary Programs and for other purposes, H.R. 4926, to designate the James L. Oberstar Memorial Highway and the James L. Oberstar National Scenic Byway in the state of Minnesota, H.R. 5448, the John F. Kennedy Center Reauthorization Act of 2014, H.R. 5146, to designate the United States Courthouse located at 700 Grant Street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as the Joseph F. Weiss, Jr. United States Courthouse, and General Service Administration resolutions. I would now like to recognize Mr. Denham for a motion.
Pursuant to Rule 1A1 of the Rules of Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, I move that the chairman be authorized to declare recesses during today's markup.
The questions on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Our first order of business is to consider H.R. 5449, the Passenger Rail Reform and Investment Act of 2014. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials and call up H.R. 5449, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. I want to begin my remarks by thanking Chairman Denham and his Democratic counterparts, Mr. Rahal and Ms. Brown, who have all worked tirelessly on this bill. Since I've taken the gavel, become the chair of the committee, it's been one of my highest priorities to passing a bipartisan passenger rail bill that reforms Amtrak. I started working on this when Chairman Micah tapped me to be the ranking member on the Railroad Subcommittee in 2007. Continued to work on it in 2011 as that chairman of that subcommittee. Amtrak, I think, is important to this country. And I think that one of the most important rail links is the Northeast Corridor. Everybody knows I'm from Pennsylvania, but I'm from western Pennsylvania. So in full disclosure, I don't live on the Northeast Corridor. I often get accused of I support the Northeast Corridor because it's in my district. It is not. But I really believe that with the population of the United States, 18% of it living on 2% of that landmass, passenger rail is extremely important to that corridor, as well as it is in other places in the country. But when you have that kind of density and population, you need to move people. It's an efficient way to move people by rail. The previous passenger rail bill resulted in some real improvements to Amtrak. Amtrak's ridership is up 17%, and its revenue is up 33%. And Amtrak's Northeast Corridor profits are up an amazing 180%. States are now paying their fair share of Amtrak's short-distance services, and Amtrak has been forced to be more responsive to their state customers. The last bill also created the Northeast Corridor Commission, or the NECC, which has helped the states. Amtrak and DOT finally have been working collaboratively on planning the future of that corridor. However, the last authorization fell short in a number of areas. The physical condition of the Northeast Corridor continues to deteriorate. Amtrak continues to face financial challenges. Rail programs are hamstrung with red tape and have not benefited from the streamlining we've done in the highway, transit, and water programs. Those shortcomings are why we introduced the Passenger Rail Reform and Investment Act of 2014, and since its introduction last week, the bill has received overall positive response from our stakeholders and Amtrak. And it's now my pleasure to turn it over to yield to the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Denham, to explain the bill in details. And I just want to say Mr. Denham has done an absolutely fantastic job, worked tirelessly. He's pushed us all to move this forward, and I appreciate that effort and that drive. So with that, I recognize the subcommittee chairman to explain the bill in the detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Rahal, Ms. Brown. This has been a long effort. It's certainly been a bipartisan effort. We have listened to all members of the committee to make something that makes sense for passenger rail reform and investment in the future. This is a great bipartisan bill, and we're going to continue to work on it. In fact, I'm going to work with Mr. Lipinski addressing endeavors in the multimodal station development as we move forward. We're calling this bill the Passenger Rail Reform and Investment Act, or PRIA 2014, because it builds on the success that we had in 2008. We align Amtrak's authorizations with realistic appropriated levels. We also finally eliminate food and beverage losses after 30 years of effort. This bill includes important reforms that will force Amtrak to operate more like a business. We keep revenues generated on the Northeast Corridor on the Northeast Corridor. That means revenue from the Northeast Corridor riders will finally be reinvested in the corridor that they ride on. We also make Amtrak more accountable to the states and force Amtrak to have an independent entity evaluate long-distance routes for savings. This bill improves the governance of the Northeast Corridor by creating a true partnership between Amtrak, the states, and commuter railroads to work together on prioritizing infrastructure projects on the Northeast Corridor. The bill also authorizes 2 grant programs focused on improving existing passenger rail rather than unrealistic high-speed rail projects of the past. This bill streamlines the approval process of RIF loans, which we know has been an issue for many railroads in our districts, giving more transparency and certainty to the approval process. We also create opportunities to compete with Amtrak, and we force Amtrak to look at revenue-maximizing partnerships with the private sector. Finally, we include reforms to accelerate environmental reviews to put rail on the equal footing with highway and transit projects. We also speed up the historic preservation review process to avoid unnecessary delays to needed upgrades for our freight and passenger rail system. Again, this is a bipartisan bill. This bill makes common sense reforms and sets up a future in which the Northeast Corridor thrives, where Amtrak is focused on improving service, and where the private sector is more engaged. Again, I want to thank Mr. Rahal, Ms. Brown, and the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Schuster, for their hard work on this bill.
I thank the gentleman. Again, thank you for your hard work on the bill. I now recognize Mr. Rahal for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I once again want to highly commend you, Chairman Schuster, for the forthright, transparent, and across the aisle work in which you have once again led this committee to produce a bill that I believe does have strong bipartisan support. Like you, commend the drive and the determination of Subcommittee Chair Denham and his tremendous work. I want to also commend the grit and gusto of our ranking member on this side of the aisle, Corrine Brown, for her determination as well to produce this bipartisan bill. Negotiations leading up to the bill seem to take a page right out of the book, The Little Engine That Could, with a lot of starts and stops. But after a long, tough climb, we finally made it to the top. This committee last reauthorized Amtrak and the Passenger Rail Investment Improvement Act of 08, which expired at the end of fiscal year 13, as we all know. That law set a new course for Amtrak, which resulted in a record ridership, increased revenue, less debt, and reduced cash operating losses. This bill builds on PRIA's successes and represents a careful balance of Republican efforts to reform Amtrak and our need to ensure that our national rail system, passenger rail system, continues to thrive in its mission to connect communities, both large and small, across this country. Of particular importance to me was ensuring that Amtrak's long-distance routes, including the Cardinal, which travels through my district in southern West Virginia, continues to operate, and that Amtrak will have the means and the ability to make improvements to those routes and services as necessary. This bill provides those assurances. Further, this bill gives the states along all Amtrak routes more of a role in planning for Amtrak's future. The bill also includes reasonable reforms to Amtrak to further improve Amtrak's bottom line, but not on the backs of those who matter most, Amtrak's hardworking men and women. That would have been a non-starter for me and many on this side. There are a number of other important provisions in this bill, but in the interest of time, I'll not go into those right now. We may very well do it during markup, but suffice to say that I do urge adoption of this legislation by the committee. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member on the subcommittee, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Schuster. I know this will not help you in your reelection, but let me just say that you are a leader in transportation for the entire country, and for that I want to thank you, and for restoring bipartisanship to the committee. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to mention Chairman Rahal. I have a picture here of Chairman Rahal in 1977 when he was first elected, Ray Hall urged Amtrak to resume service upgrade. So he has been working for Amtrak for, goodness, how many years is that, Mr. Ray Hall? That won't help him with his, okay. So let me just say that I know that both sides have other provisions that they wanted included in the bill. I personally wanted to include much more funding for Amtrak. But in the tradition of our committee, we compromised to develop a bill that ensures our nation's passenger rail system have an opportunity to thrive. This legislation maintains long-distance routes, protect hard-working Amtrak employees, invest in the Northeast Corridor, promote women and minority opportunities in rail, improve access to the RIF loan program, and take another step forward in restoring passenger rail service to the Gulf states. Rail service on this line was abandoned after Hurricane Katrina, but it was this very line that enabled Amtrak to deliver needs, basic foods, and waters to New Orleans during the hurricane. Restoring this service is critical to public safety in this region. As more and more Americans turn to rail as their preferred mode of transportation, Amtrak is building the infrastructure and organization to meet the needs. Amtrak carried a record total of 31.6 million passengers in 2013. Their ridership has been growing across the system for over a decade, with last year's ridership numbers being the largest in history. Currently, they serve more than 500 destinations in 46 states. This provides the only public transportation option for millions of Americans living in rural areas. Amtrak's financial situation has improved with steady increase in revenue and reduced debt. It's also implemented new passenger rail service, improving their infrastructure and purchasing train sets that's been built in America with 100% American-made parts. The second deadliest crash in American history, American Flight 587, went down over Queens. And I can truly say I was in New York at the time. The only way we was able to get out of New York was on the Amtrak services because all of the bridges was closed down. I know members have ideas for improving the bill, and I appreciate that. And I look forward to working with you. There is no perfect bill, but I can truly say this is a perfect start. And I yield back the balance of my time, and I want to thank Mr. Denham for his leadership on the bill also.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, and with that, recognize Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking you, Ranking Member Ray Hall, Mr. Denham, and Ms. Brown for holding this markup and for working out this bill on the Passenger Rail Reform and Investment Act of 2014. This bill reauthorizes Amtrak, providing $7 billion over 4 years, including $1.88 billion for the Northeast Corridor. The bill is far from perfect, but I appreciate the committee leadership's efforts to develop a bill in a bipartisan manner. This bill significantly reforms the way Amtrak funding is authorized. Rather than providing funds for debt service, capital, and operating expenses, the bill creates two new accounts, a Northeast Corridor Improvement Fund and the National Network account. The bill also creates a new program to provide grants to the states funded at $150 million per year, and it sets aside $14 billion in credit authority from the RIF loan program, both specifically for improvements to the Northeast Corridor. I am certainly pleased that this bill targets resources at developing the Northeast Corridor, which is critically important for our economy. According to the most recent report of the Northeast Corridor Commission, the Northeast Corridor region contains 4 of the 10 largest metropolitan areas in the country, is home to more than 51 million people, or more than 1 out of 6 Americans, and our regional economy is the 5th largest in the world, between France and Germany. If the Northeast Corridor were to unexpectedly shut down for just 1 day, the potential impact on the U.S. economy could be $100 million in transportation-related impacts and productivity losses. There is no question that it is absolutely in our national interest to do everything we can to maintain and develop the Northeast Corridor. But New Yorkers also understand the importance of maintaining a national network. So I am pleased that the bill grants Amtrak flexibility to transfer funds if needed to keep the national rail system operational. The bill also requires a more detailed plan for implementing specific improvements to the Northeast Corridor. It applies Buy America to the RIF loan program, and it reauthorizes the Intercity Passenger Rail Grant Program at $150 million annually. All of this is good, but we cannot lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that we are still woefully underfunding Amtrak and passenger rail. We spend more than $50 billion per year on highways and transit, over $15 billion a year in aviation, while Amtrak gets just $1.4 billion, or less than 2% of federal transportation spending. Last year's transportation appropriations bill funded the Federal Rail Administration at 73% below the administration's request. And this is despite the fact that Amtrak needs at least $52 billion, or $2.6 billion per year for 20 years, to meet ridership demands and to bring the system into a state of good repair. This bill still falls well short of addressing that backlog. Instead of micromanaging Amtrak's food and beverage service, our number one priority should be figuring out how to increase funding for rail and treat it as a mode equal to the way we treat the other modes of transportation. Unfortunately, this bill simply reauthorizes the current grossly inadequate funding levels, but that is not surprising given the budget constraints imposed by the majority. Given the current situation in the House, however, this bill is probably the best we can hope for right now if we want to move a bipartisan bill. So again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your efforts to advance this Amtrak reauthorization bill. I look forward to working with you and with the rest of my colleagues to make sure passenger rail receives the attention and resources it deserves. This bill is a good first step, but it's a first step only. But it's time to take that first step. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman, and with that, I recognize Mr. Petri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important markup today. I'd considered offering 2 amendments this morning, but I will not do so. However, I would like to take a moment to briefly address the issues that they would have dealt with. First, I'd plan to offer an amendment that contained language similar to H.R. 1544, the National High Performance Passenger Rail Transportation Orientation Development Act of 2013, which I introduced with our colleague Congressman Dan Lipinski last spring. This proposal aims to capture some of the increased value of commercial development around railroad station and transit station areas, which in turn would help finance rail construction infrastructure and operational expenses. The U.S. Department of Transportation would establish guidelines for transportation-oriented development programs, including special assessment districts or similar mechanisms to capture revenue from increased commercial value. Revenue streams would be directed to support rail passenger operations. Qualified projects could apply for federal incentives to finance construction and produce jobs, including direct access to existing Federal Railroad Administration programs. I hope this will open a discussion of the untapped potential for creating new streams of revenue for station development and for rail operations. There's another area of concern which has been wreaking havoc in my district and other areas of the state of Wisconsin. Trains are blocking crossings, sometimes for hours on end. Part of this is due to increase in traffic, which is good, but it was reported yesterday that one crossing was blocked for 5 hours because the crew had met its minimum hours on duty and had to stop the train to wait for a new crew to arrive. Could not move 50 feet in order to open the crossing, so it was closed for 5 hours. This is unbelievable. Although there are other issues that also need to be discussed regarding the increased traffic on rail lines, I'd plan to offer an amendment to allow a little more flexibility regarding these rules, but I understand that safety issues are not being addressed in this bill. I will be introducing a bill this week regarding this matter, and I hope the committee will consider it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to share some of my concerns. I'd like to congratulate you, Ranking Member Ray Hall, Chairman Denham, Ranking Member Brown, on the bipartisan nature of this bill. I hope as the committee continues to consider these issues, the committee will take the comments I've made into consideration.
Thank the gentleman. With that, recognize Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank the committee for its hard work on this legislation. And first, I'd like to note, as an animal lover, I'm happy to see that the language that was based on Chairman Denham's Pets on Trains legislation, which I'm a co-sponsor of, is included in this. So I thank him for his work there. As you have heard, passenger rail service is critical for many communities across the country. There's been a lot of emphasis on the Northeast Corridor, but I'd like to talk about how we need trains in the West. I represent Las Vegas, which is a major tourist destination. We welcome 41 million people from around the world to our first-class resorts, hotels, casinos, restaurants, shopping, and shows. So the ability for people to travel by whichever mode they choose is extremely important to our economy. Unfortunately, the last Amtrak train to service Las Vegas departed from the backside of the Plaza Hotel and Casino at the foot of the famous Glitter Gulch in downtown Las Vegas in May of 1997. Now, over the last 17 years, Las Vegas has continued its transformation into a premier tourist destination for people around the world. And during that time, since the train stopped running, nearly 1 million more residents now call the Las Vegas Valley home, and over 10 million more people come to Las Vegas to work and play every single year. So this growth has put an enormous strain on our highways and on our airport. So, Mr. Chairman, as we move forward in the coming months, I'd like to work with you and the ranking member on an initiative to just study restoration of passenger rail service in the Southwest, especially between Southern California and Las Vegas. This is one of only 2 metropolitan areas in the West without intercity passenger rail. The infrastructure remains in place, the need is clearly there, and I'd like to see us look at possibly restoring that Amtrak service. So I hope we can work together on this, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlelady, and we look forward to sitting down and talking and about your ideas as to address the situation in the Southwest. With that, I recognize Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all my colleagues for this bipartisan effort. I wanted to raise a sort of a general issue that is related to this and later to the surface transportation bill. And let me just say, I love and support Amtrak. We have in the Southeast Corridor, I'm from West Palm Beach, Florida, and I sort of have my mayor's hat on when I was a mayor before I got here, so I wanted to discuss how the local people react to federal legislation and money going to the state that seems never to trickle down to the local government. We have on the Southeast Corridor a number of trains that serve us. Amtrak is one. We have Tri-Rail. We have a lot of freight trains. We also have coming our way all aboard Florida. And the prospect over the next, I would say, 10 to 15 years, we could have 80 or 90 trains going up and down our Southeast Corridor, crossing over hundreds of crossings where cars also have to transverse. So a lot of potential traffic jams and so forth. And so what I wanted to say is I hope as this legislation moves along that, and I know we're modernizing the RIF loan program here, and there's some grant programs, that we keep in mind that there are local issues such as signalization, such as quiet zones, such as safety, that I hope we will enable the local governments to be able to address along with those who are providing the train service. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I look forward to working with you as we move forward on a lot of those issues you spoke about. With that, I yield to Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Chairman Schuster. I'd like to thank you, Ranking Member Rahal, Chairman Denham, and Ranking Member Brown for all your work on this bipartisan legislation. And as we're coming close to the end of this Congress, I just want to say I remember back when I knew you would be chairman of this committee, Mr. Schuster. I said to you, when you're chairman, just run this committee like your father did. Your father, Bud Schuster, did a great job of this committee, holding this committee together, the Democrats and Republicans together, and working for the best for transportation. And I have to say that with your work in these past 2 years, you are certainly on your way to doing that. And I thank you for doing that. And I certainly hope that that continues as we move into next year, that we continue on this committee to work together like this. This bill makes a number of reforms I support, especially the extension of Buy America requirements to RIF projects. I first raised that issue at a subcommittee hearing on RIF in 2009 in order to make sure that all federally funded projects look to use American steel and concrete. And I'm pleased to see this committee make these requirements explicit. Whether it's a grant, loan, or guarantee from the federal government, we should be working to make sure that the proceeds are used to invest in American components. Mr. Chairman, I agree that we must consider methods to better develop stations. I support efforts to encourage transit-oriented development, and Mr. Petri mentioned the bill that we had introduced last year, and I'm also in favor of efforts to help passengers move from rail to street to home through improved multimodal connections. I know there's some good language in this bill already regarding the what needs to be considered in station development, but I had an amendment that I was going to offer that I'm not going to do, but it would require Amtrak to examine bike sharing, bike parking, and transit as part of station development. I want to thank Chairman Denham for, as he already said in his opening statement, that he's going to work with me on working this into the bill in some manner as we move forward. So thank you, Chairman Denham, for doing that. And one last thing, I think it's fitting to discuss cycling on a day when we are marking up an Amtrak bill and a bill commemorating Jim Oberstar, an avid cyclist and a good friend to many, and a chairman who led this committee during the last Amtrak reauthorization. Jim was a visionary, and his leadership on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee will be remembered by all who worked with him. He was a mentor for many, many members during his long career in the House, including myself, and I look forward today in this committee to paying tribute to his legacy. So with that, again, I thank everyone for their work together on this bill, and you back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for the kind words towards me. I appreciate it greatly, and also in your efforts. Many would argue, and rightly so, that Chicago is the hub of rail transportation in this country, and I know you represent it, so you have a deep passion for it. And I also thank you for not offering the amendment today, and we'll continue to work together addressing some of those issues that you have concerns about. I now recognize Mr. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues in regard to your leadership. You've proven that you are working in a bipartisan manner with this committee. The Ranking Member Rahal, Chairman, Ranking Member Brown, and Chairman Denham for all the work on this. I do support 5449. As you well know, California has 3 of the top of the 5 busiest intercity rail corridors in the U.S. And it does help California by reauthorizing the Intercity Passenger Rail Grant Program at $150 million annually, which rewards states like California that invest in their own passenger rail system by providing them with additional grant funding. But it also creates a much-needed state-supported route advisory committee, which will include federal and state officials so they can collaborate on issues affecting intercity passenger rail service. While the bill requires the FRA to provide the states with detailed financial and ridership information so that states can better plan and budget their routes, which was another priority for California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. These are important changes which will help our states have a stronger voice with the FRA and with Amtrak, and it will give our states the resources to make more accurate decisions about rail routes and rail improvements. I also would like to add that California, 35 million people, just in LA County alone is about 14 million. We need more mass transit. We have buses, we have limited Metrolink, but we don't have enough transportation for the people who need it the most, which is the middle class and some of the more indigent folks. The aging infrastructure also needs to be looked at for the future because we keep putting it off. And maybe we can address this in future bills. And as you have pointed out, we do need more passenger rail options. This will create more jobs, strengthen our economy, and provide our constituency with better service. But I certainly am very thankful to you, Mr. Chairman, for drafting this important legislation and to working with both sides of the aisle. Now I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now I would like to, any other members wish to be heard? I now ask consideration for any amendments. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, before I recognize Mr. Denham, I just want to say one more time that I appreciate Mr. Rahal, Ms. Brown, and Mr. Denham's hard work on this issue. This, I think, is a positive step. There are some in Congress, I've been here 13 years, that try to do away with Amtrak. The votes just aren't there to do it because many of us believe, as I do, that Amtrak is an important asset that we need to build upon. And this bill is truly a reform bill. Building on some of the reforms from the 2008 PREA bill, adding new ones, some of the ideas in here, I think the time has come. And the idea is to make Amtrak operate better so that it can better serve the public. It can grow the jobs that are at Amtrak instead of contract, which has been happening over the last decade. So again, I think it's a common sense bill that, with these reforms in it, that we're going to continue, as I said, to build on PREA, which I just want to mention. I know that Mr. Oberstar, we're going to deal with a bill naming a highway after him, but it was in 2008. I was the ranking member on the subcommittee and worked closely with Chairman Oberstar to pass the PREA bill in 2008. So I know that Jim Oberstar is up there looking down on us, smiling, just like he is in his portrait there. Again, thank everybody for their hard work. And with that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Denham for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 5449 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. Now we will take up H.R. 5266, a bill to reauthorize the National Estuary Programs. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment and call up H.R. 5266, and that be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the Subcommittee Chairman, Mr. Gibbs, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing this legislation to be heard today. H.R. 5266, introduced by our colleague, Representative Labayando, reauthorizes the National Estuary Program found in Section 320 of the Clean Water Act. Congress first authorized the National Estuary Program in 1987 amendments to the Clean Water Act to promote the protection of the nationally significant estuaries in the United States that are deemed to be threatened by pollution, development, or overuse. Unlike many of the programs under the Clean Water Act, the National Estuary Program is a non-regulatory program. Instead, it is designed to support the collaborative, voluntary efforts of federal, state, and local stakeholders to restore degraded estuaries. Using consensus building and a collaborative decision-making process instead of a top-down regulatory approach, the National Estuary Program has been effective at promoting locally based involvement. In addition, it leverages non-federal money for restoration activities by providing seed funding for the program. In reauthorization of the National Estuary Program, H.R. 5266 makes prudent fiscal adjustments. The bill reauthorizes Section 320 of the Clean Water Act through 2018 at an amount of $27 million a year. This amount is consistent with appropriations over the past 5 years, and in recognition of the fiscal realities of today, decreases the authorized level of funding by $8 million a year. H.R. 5266 also directs more funds to where they are needed to be, the individual estuaries in the program. The bill achieves this by reducing the amount of discretionary funds made available to the EPA. Finally, the bill allocates a portion of eligible program funds for competitive awards to federal, state, and local stakeholders to address certain high-priority estuary needs, including algae blooms, hypoxia, flooding, and invasive species. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge all members to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. With that, recognize Mr. Lobiondo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you and Chairman Gibbs and the staff of the committee for helping to bring this bill to the committee. Also, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Mr. Kilmer, Mr. Posey, and Mr. Murphy of Florida, in helping to get this legislation drafted. And we've done it again, I think, in a very good bipartisan way. The National Estuary Program reauthorization is fiscally responsible by reducing the authorization levels by $8 million while ultimately increasing the amount of money each estuary program will receive. The reauthorization will detail just how the EPA is to spend the authorized and appropriated money, contrary to the years past where the EPA could make the determinations completely on their own. I think this is a very good bill, and once again, I want to thank my colleagues and urge everyone to support it.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Rahal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support this bill on this side of the aisle, and I ask unanimous consent at this time to submit the statement of the ranking member, Mr. Bishop, in support thereof, as well as his statement in support of the Lobiondo amendment.
Without objection, so ordered, and I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, I will now consider the bill open for amendment. Are there any amendments? I recognize Mr. Lobiondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 33, offered by Mr. Lobiondo.
I now recognize Mr. Lobiondo to speak on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, it's very simple. It's a bipartisan amendment. The first part of the amendment removes geographic restrictions for the award and opens the competition to any national estuary program in need of additional monies. Second, a technical error in numbering was discovered, and the G3 section was improperly referred to as G4. This amendment fixes both of these issues, and I ask the committee's support in passing this amendment. And I yield back.
Any other members wish to be heard on this amendment? Seeing none, I'll say I agree with Mr. Lobiondo's amendment. It corrects a problem that came up within the drafting of the bill, and so I support Mr. Lobiondo's amendment. Again, do any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, I ask Mr. Lobiondo. The chair recognizes Mr. Lobiondo for a motion. Oh, I'm sorry. The question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Gibbs for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 5266, as amended, be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Thank the gentleman. The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is amended and is approved and reported favorably to the House. Now we will consider H.R. 4926, a bill to designate the James L. Oberstar Memorial Highway and the James L. Oberstar National Scenic Byway in the state of Minnesota. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit and call up H.R. 4926, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize Subcommittee Chair Mr. Petri to explain the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 4926 designates the segment of Interstate Route 35 between Forest Lake, Minnesota and Duluth, Minnesota as the James L. Oberstar Memorial Highway. The bill also designates the segment of U.S. Route 61 between Duluth, Minnesota and Grand Portage, Minnesota as the James L. Oberstar National Scenic Byway. This is a small but important recognition for someone who served this country and Congress for 47 years and the longest serving member of the House of Representatives from the state of Minnesota, being a member of the House for 36 years. We all nearly all of us worked with and knew and admired Jim Oberstar. He's a great linguist. He served before being a member for a number of years, 11 years as a staff member for his predecessor, John Blotnick, who ended up being chairman of this committee and was a remarkable man in his own right, working in OSS in World War II in Yugoslavia, tying down 1 million Germans in sort of a secret war. And he became a friend of a fellow who became known as Marshal Tito during that time and played an instrumental role that's not been particularly well appreciated in the movement of Yugoslavia to independent status during the Cold War and its withdrawal from the Comintern. So Jim and I talked about that and many other things on many occasions. He was a great and loyal representative of northern Minnesota and Iron Ridge, and had been a miner himself, as had been his father. And this is a well-deserved honor for himself and his family, and I know his wife Jean appreciates it as well. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Ms. Brown for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I can begin to thank the leadership for bringing this bill forward. I always referred to Mr. Overstar as a transportation guru because he knew more about transportation than anybody in Washington, and I think he cared more about it, too. I know that he would be pleased to see the committee return to its bipartisan roots. A week ago, Mr. Overstar would have celebrated his 80th birthday, and I can't think of a better present than building on the original Amtrak reauthorization bill that he guided through final passage. I am so pleased to see this honor being restored on such a great man, and I'm glad the citizens of Minnesota will be reminded of the great work that he did for his home state and for the whole nation. God really have blessed us with the life of Mr. Overstar, and I yield back the balance of my time, and I would submit to the record Mr. Ray Hall's entire statement.
I thank the gentlelady, and with that, recognize Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to join in the statements of Mr. Petri and about Mr. Oberstar, and also to Ranking Member Brown. Mr. Oberstar was my chairman the first 4 years I was here, and I served with him those 4 years when he served. He was an outstanding gentleman, a scholar, and did love this country. It's appropriate that he be honored today, which is Constitution Day, because he loved the Constitution. I also want to mention something that's in addition to what Mr. Nolan's done to bring this bill and recognize him, which I commend him for. 45 members of the House joined with me, including the chairman, in writing the Department of Energy and asking them to recognize Mr. Oberstar for his efforts in getting a photovoltaic system on the rooftop of the Department of Energy's Forstall building. I remember when that occurred, he was extremely pleased. It was the first time I think I'd ever heard or really thought about the word photovoltaic, and I went and looked it up and learned it. Because of that, I didn't know what he was speaking of. But it was a purpose. He wanted to educate the public about this type of energy and provide information to the federal and local folks about what they could do with this type of energy system and demonstrate the federal government's commitment. The Secretary Ernest Moniz has sent me a letter saying that they shared our perspective, and that a plaque recognizing Mr. Oberstar's contributions would be placed up in the Department of Energy to give him the recognition he deserves for having that photovoltaic system set up. I wanted to mention that, thank the chairman for his signing the letter along with the 44 other members of the House, and thank Mr. Oberstar for his life well lived. Thank you, sir. I yield back the balance.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard? Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, chairman of the subcommittee, for consideration of this important legislation. Jim Oberstar indeed lived a life that was bigger in life. I'll never forget the day Jim walked onto the floor of the House of Representatives after his defeat in that 2010 election. And he was noticed by the other members, and the House of Representatives burst into spontaneous bipartisan applause. I'm not saying that's never happened before, but I've never seen that happen before, and it was an incredible testimonial to the high regard that Jim Oberstar's life and service here was held in. He was a politician, a statesman, an educator, a gourmet chef, a Peace Corps volunteer, not to mention a husband, a father, opera lover, a linguist, a biker, a hiker, you name it. Jim was into it. One of our humorists from Minnesota once said his intellect was so huge, and his mind was so curious about everything, and he was so capable of absorbing it all. He, perhaps to a fault, assumed that everybody else wanted and had the same interest, and of course he was almost always wrong on that point. But indeed, he was a remarkable man, and he staffed and served on this committee for over 40 years. And let me say that this particular Highway 35 is the main thoroughfare from the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul to Duluth, Minnesota, which is the largest city in greater Minnesota. It's the largest freshwater port anywhere in the world. It's also one of the major railheads in the state of Minnesota. And as we all know, Jim championed the interstate highway system as well as ports and airports during his chairmanship and staff work here on the House Transportation Committee. And this particular interstate highway links all of these transportation modes and is therefore a fitting tribute. As a result, if this bill is passed, I'm told by the head of transportation in Minnesota that it's likely that the state of Minnesota will also make the same name change and is considering historical markers and other tributes associated with the highway with our dear and departed friend. This is a bipartisan bill, enjoys support of all the members of the Minnesota delegation, and it appears that is the same in the case with the members of this committee. But, Mr. Chairman, I do have a substitute at the desk.
At the appropriate time, I'll recognize the gentleman. Ms. Johnson would like to yield back.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Ms. Johnson.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to associate myself with all the great remarks that have been made and make one other comment that I have not heard. Mr. Oberstar spoke fluently about 5 different languages. And one of the things that helped me when I was chairing a subcommittee on this committee, I would ask him to come because if there were names that a Texas English person only could not pronounce, he'd help me. And so I have great memories of Mr. Oberstar, and he did a great job here, made a great chairman, and I'm delighted to feel the spirit of the old committee with our new leadership as we reflect on Mr. Oberstar's service. Thank you.
Any other members wish to be heard? With that, before I recognize Mr. Nolan, I just wanted to say a few words about Mr. Oberstar. He certainly was somebody that I looked to as a mentor when I came to Congress, and in fact, when he became the chairman of the committee, I spoke to my father as I did this morning, and my father said the same thing that day as he did to me this morning. Nobody in Washington, nobody in the United States knew as much about transportation as Jim Oberstar. He truly was the master of the universe when it comes to transportation and to know the ins and the outs on all the modes. So we certainly will miss him. And many people talk about my father and what a good chairman he was. But it was that partnership with Jim Oberstar that made him a good chairman. They worked together. They were truly partners. They'd work out their differences, and then they'd bring the bill out and bring it to the floor and pass it. So all those fights that my father had and all those victories he had, it was Jim Oberstar standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder with him that enabled him to be successful as a chairman. So we will miss him. Chairman Oberstar, as I mentioned earlier, in the 2008 PREA bill, I was going back and forth with him, and I finally went into his office. And if you saw Jim Oberstar's office, I mean, he had it piled up with all kinds of reports and old legislation, and he handed me a bill. He handed me legislative language, and I looked at it, and I looked up, and I said, "This is not even what we talked about, Mr. Chairman." So I got a little upset with him, and he started to laugh. And he said, "That's the 1988 PREA bill that I wrote." And he just wanted to demonstrate to me that he had that depth of knowledge, which he did. And we ended up working our differences out, and we were able to pass PREA, which, again, today we're building on that success. And that was Jim Oberstar's bill that we passed in 2008, and I was proud to work with him on that. Again, over 50 years or almost 50 years serving in Congress, and in fact, his 40-year anniversary of being on the committee as a staffer and as a member of the committee, my father and I presented him with what we thought was an appropriate gift. It was a yellow jersey that they wear in the like they wear in the Tour de France when you lead the pack, and it was that was a gift for his 40th birthday. He truly was the Iron Man of transportation. The gentleman who was from the town of I have it right here. What's the town? Oh, not from the town, but the Iron Range of northeastern Minnesota. And I also will, on a personal note, my life before I came to Congress, I was an auto dealer. And Jim Oberstar was one of my customers. He bought a PT Cruiser. It was still operating to this day. I'd see him drive around, so he was a good customer and truly a great gentleman. And as I said earlier, one of the true giants when it comes to transportation. So we will miss him greatly, and we wish his wife Jean well. And this is obviously a fitting way to memorialize Jim Oberstar, Chairman Oberstar. And with that, recognize Mr. Nolan for an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment in the form of a substitute.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
The amendment would...
Amendment number 66, offered by Mr. Nolan.
Mr. Nolan is recognized to speak on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the bill as amended in the form of this amendment would simply restrict the designation to that portion of Highway 35W between the Twin Cities and Duluth, our major city. So,
I agree with the gentleman. I'm willing to support the amendment. I think it's appropriate. And with that, anybody else wish to be heard on the amendment? Seeing none. The questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? Seeing none, I recognize Mr. Petri for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4926, as amended, be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is amended and is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. Okay. We will now consider H.R. 5448, the John F. Kennedy Center Reauthorization Act of 2014. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management and call up H.R. 5448, and that it be considered as read and open amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Petri to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 5448 reauthorizes the capital repair and maintenance program of the Kennedy Center building. The building is a national monument owned and maintained by the federal government and is a memorial to our late President John F. Kennedy. The amounts authorized in the legislation will help address the building's inefficiencies and ensure the building can continue to operate cost-effectively, reducing costs over time to the taxpayer. The current authorization expires this month, and H.R. 5448, the bill before us, would reauthorize the maintenance and capital programs of the Kennedy Center for the next 5 years. I urge the committee to report this legislation favorably to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Carson for a statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to be original co-sponsor of H.R. 5488. The Kennedy Center is first and foremost a presidential memorial. We have a responsibility to fund its maintenance consistent with the dignity of a presidential memorial. So I continue to believe that allocating more funding for proactive maintenance is in the best interest of taxpayers. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the JFK Center Reauthorization Act of 2014 so they can continue their great work. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do any of the members wish to be recognized? We will now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments? Seeing no amendments being offered, I recognize Mr. Petri for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move H.R. 5448 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered favorably to the House. We will now take up H.R. 5146, a bill to designate the United States Courthouse located at 700 Grant Street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as the Joseph F. Weiss, Jr. United States Courthouse. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management and call up H.R. 5146, and that be considered and read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Seeing none, so ordered. I recognize Subcommittee Chairman, or excuse me, I recognize Mr. Petri to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 5146 would designate the United States Courthouse located at 700 Grant Street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as the Joseph F. Weiss, Jr. United States Courthouse. Judge Weiss was a respected jurist in the legal community in Pennsylvania. He was born, raised, and attended college in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and after serving our country as a captain in the U.S. Army and nearly being killed on a World War II battlefield, he returned to Pittsburgh to attend law school and go into legal practice. He was in the private practice of law and served as a judge on the Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, prior to his appointment to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. In 1973, he was appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit and served until his death earlier this year. Naming this federal courthouse in Pittsburgh after him highlights Judge Weiss's commitment to the law and public service. So I'd urge the committee to report this legislation favorably to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize Mr. Carson for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To echo my colleague Petri's sentiment, I think simply because of Judge Weiss's dedicated service to the legal community and his exemplary time as a jurist in Pittsburgh, it is only fitting to name this courthouse in his honor, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I just want to say thank you to my colleague from Pittsburgh, Mr. Doyle, who was the person that put this forward. I think that's appropriate to name that courthouse in Pittsburgh for Judge Weiss for his years of service. And again, thank Mr. Doyle for bringing that to the committee's attention and moving this bill forward. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll now consider H.R. 5146 for the amendments. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, I recognize Mr. Petri for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move H.R. 5146 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor by signifying by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. We will now consider the 12 General Service Administration resolutions, 6 for GSA's Capital Investment and Leasing Program, and 6 from the Veterans Administration Construction Long-Range Capital Plans. I ask unanimous consent to call up the resolutions in block, that they be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Seeing none, so ordered. I recognize Mr. Petri to explain the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're considering today 12 GSA resolutions, 6 from the GSA's budget year 2014 and 2015 capital investment and leasing program, and 6 submitted in the VA's construction long-range capital plans. 6 resolutions from the GSA's program include 3 capital projects and 3 leases. These resolutions will shrink GSA's leased inventory, consolidate federal workers into government-owned space, and save more than $225 million in avoided lease costs. Approving these resolutions will bring our total savings this Congress to more than $2.2 billion. I'd like to recognize the work of members of the Building and Grounds Committee, GSA, and OMB for working to reduce space costs. Mr. Chairman, today we're also considering 6 GSA resolutions for leases for VA clinics. These clinics are critical for ensuring quality health care for our veterans, and our committee's involvement is needed to ensure that these get done. Recently, questions have been raised regarding the scope of VA's authority to execute the leases, and as a result, we're working with the VA Committee, OMB, GSA, and the VA to investigate this issue and identify long-term solutions so that we can ensure the space needed for quality health care for our veterans is, in fact, available. However, in the interim, in order to complete these 6 critical health care clinic projects, the VA must use GSA's authorities under Title 40 and the Public Buildings Act. And under GSA's Title 40 leasing authority, leases above a certain annual cost threshold must be approved by this committee. The 6 VA leases before us today exceed that threshold and are time sensitive. As such, the VA and GSA have requested the committee authorize these leases so there is no further delay in the procurement process. These facilities are critical outpatient facilities for our veterans and have all been approved by Congress through VA authorization legislation, but now require our action and approval to allow GSA to use its authorities to complete them. I urge the committee to approve these GSA resolutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize Mr. Carson for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, those 6 leases that GSA has submitted on behalf of the Veterans Affairs Administration involve the expansion of space for outpatient clinics and a health care center that will provide critical medical care for our nation's veterans. And the Department of Veterans Affairs has worked closely with GSA to really analyze their requirements for such needed clinics. I'd also like to note that one of the new clinics being authorized today is in South Bend, Indiana, and the new clinic will add outpatient services to meet increasing veteran demands for South Bend and for primary care, specifically for mental health services. So I enthusiastically support taking action to provide these vital services to veterans in the great Hoosier State, and I look forward to working with members of the committee and GSA to shrink our federal footprint, and I urge my colleagues to support these resolutions. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll now consider the resolution for amendment. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Petri for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the 12 committee resolutions be approved en bloc.
Questions on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The resolutions are approved. I ask unanimous consent that each bill ordered reported today will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating any amendments adopted without objection. So ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, and conforming changes to each of the bills ordered reported today to reflect the actions of the committee. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman, after consultation with the ranking member, have the authority to strike or revise any provision of any of these bills ordered reported today that would cause a sequential referral to another committee, or that it would cause the bill to be subject to a Budget Act or Rule 21 cut-go point of order. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the committee authorize the chairman or his designee to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the following bills that were ordered reported by the committee today, or similar Senate bills: H.R. 5449, H.R. 5266 as amended, H.R. 4926 as amended, H.R. 5448, and H.R. 5146. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Rule 5 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, the Chair notes the presence of a quorum for actions taken on all committee business today. With that, the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure completed its business for the day, and the committee is adjourned.